Hey, what's up, my know-it-alls? That's right, it's time for Picard Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation. This was an exciting episode, so much so that I have more screenshots than I know what to do with. Anyway, I definitely enjoy seeing Earth through their eyes. That's something I've always kind of liked, especially when the original series did it, and you get to hear that commentary from a utopian society people. There are people who want to kind of rewrite history these days and say that Star Trek wasn't about a utopian society or about the potential for a future that was better than the present. But the truth is that's always really been what Star Trek's about. Anyway, so you hearing them talk throughout that the timeline, the time frame rather, being in the present. That's really sort of a staple. Same as much as really cool starships or seeing the crew in a briefing of some kind. Those are very much ideals of Star Trek in a way that I think benefit the series in terms of being able to allow it rather to be a commentary. So all that said, let's get right in. The episode begins with right where we left off. You get to see the vice president, now president of the Confederacy, and him and his two security guys are holding everyone at phaser point, if you will. And one of them fires a shot. Elnor's down. Elnor's in rough shape. Everyone's freaking out about that. Meanwhile, Jurati takes the opportunity to sort of sidestep. She's way in the back of the ship, you got to remember. So she sidesteps everyone else and makes sure that the Borg Queen is plugged in to the ship in the hopes that they can go ahead and make the jump that they need to make. So then, as they're talking, you get this. Seven tries to be really brave about it and sort of steps up, and she's like, you're ruining everything, and she tries to pass off the story. Meanwhile, her husband, if you will, is like, yeah, no, I didn't believe that anyway, and he asks her, like, what's my name or something. My thought was that's the wrong time for that question. Anyway. So literally a fight breaks out. The security guys start kind of shooting, and so then Seven has to fight them off, and she's amazing. I really love the way they have Jerry Ryan do stuff. But ultimately she vaporizes one, and Raffi vaporizes another. Then Raffi turns it on. She turns on Seven's husband in this alternate universe. She takes no small amount of joy from having vaporized Seven's husband. Anyways, so Picard and everyone just rushes over to check on Elnor, and ultimately the Borg Queen sort of sets her sights on what needs to happen as she's kind of starting to connect to everything. Meanwhile, Rios has to make the shot because they're doing a slingshot. If you've seen Star Trek the Motion Picture 4, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, the original, and I think Picard even mentions that in this episode. The original Enterprise did a slingshot. Actually, he mentions it in the previous episode. But he talks about how the original Enterprise under Kirk did a slingshot maneuver, and so that's what they're going to do. They're going for time warp. While this is all happening, Elnor is rushed down to Sickbay. He's put on the med bed, which stabilizes him, and so Seven's trying her best, and meanwhile, the other Confederacy, the Confederation starts chasing them and pursuing them with various variations on starships that we know. So I think if I'm not mistaken, the two variations are like a Voyager-looking class and some Sovereign-looking class. I say Voyager and Sovereign-looking because they're adjusted versions of ours. And it might even be another one that's like a Defiant class or something stupid. I say Defiant class, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, it's been a long time since I was a chief engineer, so I'm doing the best I can. And then out of nowhere, Q shows up for a brief second, and Q sort of like, this is all you understand, isn't it, Picard? And Picard's like, Q, and then he's gone. So Jurati continues to plug everything in. The Borg Queen is sort of starting to come online, and then Rios manages to fire off a shot, takes out one of the ships. At the same time, the explosion of the other attacking ships knocks a whole bunch of things over, and you get to see the Borg Queen. This is that scene that they released earlier last week, where the Borg Queen is sort of walking on her forearms, rather, at and toward Jurati, who is somewhat scared. And so the Borg Queen's like, here, let me. And she sort of latches on these little things, and she just begins to like rise up. It's a pretty cool scene. Because it's super intimidating, and that's when the lights behind her begin to really kind of come in strong, because she's really pushing. And of course, it's green energy, because green energy means Borg. It's true. That and Matrix, but I guess those two things might actually be kind of the same thing. Anyway, up front, you get on the panel, they make the distinction as you start to see the ship's normal red and gray readouts become green, because the ship's being assimilated. And she's all kinds of bad. So as they approach the sun, they get into the sun's orbit. Oh, no, that's right. Let me back up. She actually wrecks the last two ships, which is pretty awesome. And she's like, let me go ahead and handle this. So then they get going around the sun, and they hit it, and it's almost like Back to the Future. It's like this big explosion as they go, and then they hit the time warp. And we get this really neat variation on the old Star Trek 4 sequence, because Rios is even like, warp 7, warp 8, warp 9, 9.2, 9.3, 9.5. They get to 9.8 or something, or 9.7 or something. And then everything sort of slows down, it extends, and you see they show each of the cast members with that sort of effect on their face. And it's supposed to be them actually making the jump. There's a really cool, almost a la Stargate sort of effect that they do, and then poof, they're out, and you see them flying up toward Earth. And so real quick, Jurati does her show business and says, this is definitely Earth based on X, Y, and Z. So, decomposition of atmosphere and particulates in the air, X, Y, Z. So but the problem is that the ship is no longer under their control, because the Borg Queen is now was flying everything. So she's sort of broken. The Borg Queen is broken, and so they're going down pretty fast. They get into a controlled crash, and Picard's like, well, I know where we need to go, and I think he crashes them in Paris. I'm assuming it's a giant park is wherever he's at, not park, but it's a giant forested area. Anyway, so they land, and immediately the Borg Queen begins sucking in all the energy, because she's trying to fix herself. So Raffi's down below, and she's freaking out. Power's going out, and she's like, we need power to the bed, and the whole thing is just it's one thing after another in this episode. It rolls you very quickly through some stuff, which I'm actually okay with. And so then finally they all rush back, and they're like, we need to unplug her, and they try to do some stuff, and Rio pulls out his phaser and points it at it's not really a phaser at this point, because I think the Confederation doesn't believe in stun. So he points it at her, and Picard's like, no, we need her. You can't destroy her. She's the only one that can help us. Down below, Raffi and Elnor have a moment as he clearly is about to expire. He's about to die. And so he says he really feels glad that he had this symbol thing in his pocket, and Raffi looks at it, and he's like, he had it both in his universe and this one. And then he dies, and Raffi is she's broken up by it. It's rough. So she suddenly has an all new resolve, as everyone sort of gives her a minute, and Picard's like, look, we got to go on, we got to move on, and she's not happy. Raffi is not a happy camper. So everybody kind of has this talk, and she steps forward, and she's like, look, I don't care. We're going to go to the tallest building, we're going to look for any alien technology, or future tech or whatever, and get this whole thing handled. It's rough, man, and they all know she's angry and she's upset. So they decide that the best course of action is for everybody to kind of get together, and the three of them to go, and Picard and Jurati are going to stay. Meanwhile, Jurati is looking at the Borg Queen, and she tries to come up with a plan, and she talks to Picard about it, and she explains to him that the neural network of the Borg is still active, but there's no one to connect to here in the past. Jurati came up with a plan. The plan is she says, if you plug me into the Borg Queen, I can help bring her back up to speed and bring her back online, and you pull me out before I get fully assimilated. That's a partial assimilation. Roll credits. So, and Picard's like, no, absolutely not. Won't do it. The rest are getting ready, and they're like, well, we got to get outfits for the time period. And they go through the closets, and they find stuff that is somewhat appropriate, at least what they say is appropriate. Meanwhile, Seven's beginning she begins the first steps of an existential awakening. And by that, she's looking in the mirror, she notices, and she's kind of she's starting to realize she feels a little different without all her Borg stuff. And it's a very interesting moment. That's when Raffi comes in, and the whole time Seven's trying to connect to her and trying to say, listen, I understand, I'm sorry, this sucks, this is terrible. And Raffi's just like, look, I just want everybody to do their job. We got to get this handled. And Raffi's she said earlier, and I glossed right past this, she's making the assumption that fixing the timeline will give her Elnor back. And that's all she cares about. She's not going to get into the show business with them. As they're going through all that, Picard is down below. He's down below, and Jurati comes down, and she says, look, we absolutely have to have this conversation. I can't let this if there's something I can do to solve and fix this, you have to let me. And and of course we all know, if anybody who watches any kind of Star Trek ever, Picard's not illogical. Picard's extraordinarily logical, which is that this is the end result that has to happen. So he gives in, and they ultimately watch the other three transport off, and which is fun because there's clearly something going on with the transporter's been sort of jury-rigged together because it's a little wonky, and so they're transported away. And Picard is like, okay, it's your turn next, and he plugs her in, and as she's talking, he's like, and she sort of goes slack-faced. And he begins monitoring the neural network functionality. Meanwhile, we get graced with all these really great B-roll shots of Los Angeles. You get to see the pier, you get to see the hills, everything. And eventually you get to see Raffi. Everybody beams in someplace different. Raffi beams in the middle of an alley right in front of a sort of a homeless tent village. And then it's really clever. Seven beams in. She beams in, and this little girl's like, "Hey, are you a superhero?" And Seven's like, "You got to keep my secret." Meanwhile, you see Rios. He transports in from above, and he's sort of been misplaced. And of course, he falls down, hits his head, and they have to end up getting him help. And he gets rushed to this little urgent care center, so to speak. But it's really it's a clinic for low-income people. Also, it's a clinic that helps illegal immigrants. So there's that little, which will come back around, but you don't know that yet. Anyways, and they bring him in, they rush him in. This little kid, the son of one of the doctor, picks up his comm badge. So you're like, of course, comm badge gets lost. Literally, Jurati's like, don't go to hospitals, don't get exposed to the police, and don't lose your comm badge. No technology, low impact. Don't want to damage the timeline anymore. Butterflies. So the kid's like, what's going on? What's this? Anyways, Raffi gets mugged, and what's hilarious is she's like, money? What are you talking about? This is that thing I was talking about at the outset. So she disarms the guy, takes his gun. Of course, Seven's nearby because she's able to track the comm badge. And Seven's like, really? You're knocking people out? What's going on here? And so she's like, yeah, I don't know. And they have this really interesting conversation that shows, like, all of this hope and all of this disparity. How are they right next to each other? Like, what's happening that's what happens? And so, again, very indicting commentary of Los Angeles. I think it's interesting because I don't know that I would qualify Los Angeles or California as the epitome of where our society is as a whole. I definitely think there's so the conversation, because it is a socio-political one, it's an interesting one, and it's one that Star Trek always puts forward. My problem is it always does it through the lens of California, which I don't care where you stand or where you sit. on the subject. Chicago's the same way. I live here in Atlanta. New York's the same way. All these major hubs, but there's a lot of other parts of the country as well that aren't like this. So I feel like it's a one-sided discussion, and it's one that feels uniquely California. I don't know if that's East Coast. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. West Coast, rather. So anyway, whatever. Love to hear about your thoughts in the comment section. So we cut back to Picard and Dr. Jurati, who are still there, and they're plugged in, and Jurati's starting to go through in her head, as in like what's in her head. She begins talking, and the Borg Queen is basically Picard's stuck with Jurati's id, so she's stuck with her subconscious mind and gets to hear all the insecurities and everything else. It's really interesting. Jurati says some things and whatnot, and she goes through the angry phase and a happy phase and a fearful phase, whatever. But ultimately, things are getting bad. Meanwhile, Raffi and Seven arrive at the building they're supposed to go to, and they're looking around sort of where they're supposed to be heading, and a security guy comes and it's funny, and then all of a sudden, Seven puts on the shows like, my girlfriend and I were trying to get this thing done, and she can't really think of the word for photograph because she's 7'1", but also they're from the future. Photograph's a little different. And so, but it's really funny, this little song and dance they do as a couple, and the security guy's like, and next thing you know, Seven's like, nobody likes me. What's going on? How come this guy thought I was charming? And it's just really, it's an interesting, Raffi's like, you know what? You in 2024 need to get a room. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. It's pretty funny. So then we see Rios, he wakes up, or he's being helped, and he's at this little clinic thing, and he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. And the doctor's like, all right, gotta go. He tries to get up and almost falls over. So he has a concussion, and they're dealing with that. Meanwhile, Seven is looking at everything else, and she goes, maybe this is where it starts, and you see this image of I'm sure they shot it during some of the wildfires that happened last year, but it's basically Hollywood Hills on fire. It's very, very indicative, and so again, California problem that they're trying to make seem like it's how the rest of the world is, and again, I kind of take issue with that. Yes, the world isn't perfect, but I feel like it's funny, my mind is not the same it was when I was 13 years old watching Star Trek. I'm now 40 years old, and I'm watching this, and I go, I don't know, it feels off. Anyway, it feels like a very off distinction that's being made here. So they begin to sort of track, and you get to see the Rios' signal show up, show off, show up, show off, like disappear, show up, disappear, show up. And then we see Rios, the little kid who took his badge, is sitting there in the clinic, and he's just kind of pushing it on and off, listening to the little chirp. Then we go back to Picard and them, and as the Borg Queen was starting to take, she got about 90% of her neural activity back when it comes to being, and then all of a sudden, Jurati started talking like her in like computer speak. So then Picard pulled the plug. So now we're back, and we get to see the Borg Queen is woken up. And the Borg Queen and Picard is tending to Jurati, and they're talking, and the Borg Queen tries to strike a deal. You give me the ship, I'll give you the Watcher. I have his location, and I have their location, and I have the time frame. I don't know if it's a he or not. And so the Watcher is someone who uniquely will cause the problem, I guess. So we cut back to the clinic, and there's all of a sudden an immigration bust. So there's the police are coming in, and it's a huge thing, and back to the ship, and the Borg Queen is trying to really, she's like, what are you going to do? We know how you're going to do this, and Jurati wakes up, and the Borg Queen's like, look, we all know how this is going to go down. Let's just cut right to the chase. And that's when, or rather the Borg Queen, that's when Jurati looks at her and is like, you don't have anything. And the Borg Queen's like, hang on a second. Where did it go? And Agnes is like, computer, locate subroutine called stuff. She says something else. Hey man, I'm trying to keep the channel clean. But she says, bring me, open subroutine stuff I stole from the Borg Queen. And I was like, that's awesome. And Picard is so proud of her, and she looks like a kid who's just pleased her grandfather. And then the Borg Queen looks at her, and she says, oh, you've just made the most terrible mistake you could have possibly made. She's like, what's that? And she goes, you've impressed me. Oh, it's awesome. Because essentially Jurati hacked her brain, and the Borg Queen did not expect it or even see it coming, which means we could be looking by the end of this as Agnes become either... I'm going to make a bold prediction. Ready? Here we go. Bold prediction. By the end of this season, Jurati and the Borg Queen are going to become one. And we're going to end up with a weird kind of hybrid Agnes for next season. Because I feel like you don't introduce this relationship and not pay it off. You have to, there's just too many things happening that you have to pay off. If you don't, it's a missed opportunity. And you sold this bill of goods. Anyway, so back to the clinic. You see the immigration police sort of it's Homeland Security, whatever. But they break in, and Rios comes out in a lab coat, and he tries to be like, hey doc, you got to help me with this other patient, and blah blah blah. And so they immediately are like, oh yeah, well what's this on your hand and this and that. Anyway, the episode ends with Rios getting arrested. So yeah. I don't know what they're going to do. I have no idea, but it was a good cliffhanger to end on. I'm actually really excited to see where the show goes. So, all right, here we go. Overall, the know-it-all index for this episode. This is a hardcore. I would say this is boy, it's tough, man. I'd say it's 8.5 out of 10. Yeah, 8.5 out of 10. It's a good, strong episode. Kept me going, kept me entertained. Did not feel like the 45 minutes that it was. It actually felt very much like a shorter... I thought this was like a 30-minute episode because it flew by so fast. There's so many things happening. So, yeah, there you go. Now you know. And if knowing is half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the little bell notification icon to be notified when new content drops. But still, this isn't over. This right here, this isn't over. So... hit me up, man. Comment down below. Let me know what you think of the episode or thought of the episode. I know there's a few of you who've been commenting. Thank you so much for engaging with me in conversation. I really love that. And thank you for the Star Trek community for welcoming me back rather. That's really awesome. And I'm looking so much forward to really interacting more. I want to start doing more stuff with Discovery and a couple other things. Right now, the scheduling's a little off when it comes to Picard and Discovery for me because I only have so much time in the morning before my day job. So, again, because it helps. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Don't ever forget, everyone loves a know-it-all. See you next week.